Yes, thank you very much for your interest and time and attention. As you've heard, I've gone through the natural sciences, the engineering sciences and social sciences, and through Future ICT, actually, I was confronted with the digital revolution. I'm now writing a book about this smart, digital, and resilient society that's about to emerge and what we can do to use it to our advantage. To avoid misunderstandings right away, this is not a talk about a project, but we're talking about the future of Europe here. Intelligent machines are now better chess players than humans. They're better workers, they're better drivers, they're better players. Will they be better doctors, better lawyers, better politicians, better scientists? This is the kind of question that we need to ask as we're faced with a digital revolution. This digital revolution is on its way. In about 10 to 15 years, maybe 25, we'll see that computers can do most of the tasks that people are doing, will reach brain power. And that has a lot of implications. One of these implications is that cybercrime is exploding too. And in fact, by now, we're paying $3 trillion for this. So this is substantial. But there are even more important implications than this, because this information and communication technologies have the potential to change most of our traditional institutions. The way we educate, the way we do research, the way we move, with Google self-driving cars and others, the way we go shopping since many years, the way we produce, say, 3D printing and many other new possibilities. Health systems, through personalized medicine, and most likely politics too, and for sure the economy. We see that financial business is undergoing fundamental transformation, insurance business is changing, and even war. So this means we're entering a new time, a new era, and it has fundamental implications for employment or unemployment. So what you can see over here, in 1850 we had about 70% of people working in the agricultural sector. Now it's about 3 to 5%. We had an industrial revolution driven by the invention of the steam engine and other inventions that created new jobs in the industrial sector. Later on, the service sector came up. And the main point about this is that the transition from one kind of economy to another was usually not a smooth one. So we are facing challenges as we are now entering a fourth phase, where basically this new digital sector, characterized by information and knowledge production, is challenging the old sectors, in particular industrial production and the service sector. In fact, within the next about 20 years, it's expected that about 50% of jobs will be lost in the industrial sector because of the use of robotics and other tools. And the same will happen to the service sector, because there are many routine jobs, a lot of standardized procedures that have to be done, and one day that can be done by computers or algorithms or intelligent machines like cognitive computers. So that means in about 20 years we'll have, say, 3% in agriculture, plus 7.5% approximately in the industrial sector, plus, say, 30% in the service sector, which is less than 50% of jobs that will be created by all three classical sectors of our economy. In other words, 50% of jobs will have to come from this new digital sector. And the question is how to create these jobs, given that the big IT companies usually have a few hundred or a few dozen employees, but they have a global business running. So where will all these new jobs come from? It's clear that this will produce an enormous pressure on the economy, and with this on our societies, and that will create a transformation of our economy and society. And in fact, we are already in the middle of this. There is a massive loss of jobs already in certain countries, and young people in particular are suffering from this. So sometimes this skyrockets beyond 50%. So this is happening already, and it's going to erase, according to estimates, about 40% of today's leading companies, among the 500 leading companies, within 10 years' time. Already in the past we've seen that companies like Kodak, even though it owns most of the digital camera patents, didn't manage to survive because it couldn't transform itself quickly enough into a modern digital company. And in the same way, do we see pressure on cities? Many cities are in a very bad financial situation, not just those that produced cars in the past. And we also see that states are suffering from high debts. So this cannot go on forever. And so the question is, should we spend our remaining money on fixing the old system? Or maybe it cannot be fixed because it's just a system that's outdated? Or should we use it to build a better system for the future? Now here's an interesting quote from Alan Kay. He says that the best way to predict the future is to invent it. So why don't we invent the future in Europe? In fact, it has happened in the past. Tim Berners-Lee came up with this idea of the World Wide Web, and he came up with two proposals. Both of them were turned down, but he did it anyway. Unfortunately, he did it in the United States. So the United States is becoming a major, if not the major player in information and communication technologies. Now, the Internet of Things is a new chance for Europe, but this time we would really take it. And the question is how to get from a digital desert, because the big data companies are in the United States, the hardware producers are in Asia. So, what is Europe's role at the moment and in the future? How to get from a digital desert to a digital rainforest? For sure, Europe can't afford to be a digital colony. And I recommend you to read this new Spiegel article over here. It's very interesting and calls for action. So we really need to be able to compete. We must be able to compete with the USA, with China, Russia, Japan, Singapore, South Korea. All of them seem to be doing something like future ICT projects. Not always are they participatory projects, most of the time not, but something is happening, and Europe should use the talent that it has over here. We need to be aware that we are making major investments for agriculture every single year. We're making public investments for the industry sector. We're making public investments for the service sector. Each of these investments amounts to hundreds of billions every year. So, what investments are needed for the digital sector that is now emerging? I personally believe that Europe needs its own approach. We cannot just copy the American approach years later, given that this is an exponentially accelerating sector. The Internet of Things allows us to create the smart data Europe needs, that's what I believe, and even a novel search engine, and many more things, as I will explain. And I recommend to combine the Internet of Things with social and complexity science, because this is what Europe is strong in. So here's where Europe can excel, or it can set itself apart from the Silicon Valley. And one of the ideas that I'd like to promote over here is to create a planetary nervous system and to build it as a participatory citizen web. All it takes, actually, is you and your smartphone, because we can connect all these smartphones to build a global measurement system. and connected to other sensors too. Each smartphone contains more than 10 sensors, probably many more in the future. But we need to build a system that we can trust. An information system that is controlled by you. So basically, our planetary nervous system, as we're currently building it, foresees that the users can determine in detail what sensors are opened, whether the data of these sensors are used just by the user or whether these data are shared. And also, I think we should have an infrastructure that allows the user to decide in detail who can access what kind of data for what kind of purpose. And the MIT, for example, has been working on open personal data store. That would be one possible solution to re-establish the informational self-determination, which is, I think, very important to bring the age of big data together with democratic principles. So let's do this together. Let's create a participatory system, an open data source, but real-time, something like a real-time streaming Wikipedia, and produce our own data. Because, well, it's very difficult to get access to big data in Europe. And so, why don't we create it ourselves, based on the principle of fair sharing? That means you could take data from this platform. But of course, you should also share back, because otherwise this is not going to work. Same thing with the measurement procedures, what we're doing with the sensors in the smartphones and all the other sensors. You need computer codes to do these measurements. Now, of course, you should be able to download these source codes also because you want to know what's really going on in your smartphone. Can you trust this computer code? But on the other hand, you'd like to adapt it to what you have in mind. So you download it, you sit together with friends or colleagues, and you adjust it to the purpose that you want to realize. And then you upload it again, and in this way, many new possibilities are created. So this is not just an app. It's a platform that allows you to implement your own creative ideas. That means to use the outputs of your sensors and turn them into inputs for something else, some actuators, some games, whatever. So as a user, you would be able to determine what you do with this. And here's just a very small example. We have created a happy game to solve conflict. So just assume there are two groups of people and they can't agree on something, like what TV program to watch or what pizza to order or whatever, And then we have a virtual arm wrestling over here, using the accelerometer data. So what I'm also trying to say here now, in order for this platform to be successful, it needs to be a fun platform. People will not join in just to do something good for humanity. We need to use gamification to make it interesting for a broad community of people, for millions of Europeans and citizens of the world. And with a micropayment system on top, everyone could establish an own business, because this will be open data. You could come up with your own consultancy. You could come up with your own products that other people could print out on their 3D printer. You could come up with your own services, personalized services and products. And this is where the millions of jobs hopefully would be created in the digital sector. and collaborate with others. So people would not just be passive consumers, they would also be active producers, and they would be part of actually a huge information, innovation, and production ecosystem. So the idea is really that I take data, I do something with it, I produce new data, I share it, other people could use that to produce a new product or service, share it back, and so on. In this way, it would really create exponential innovation. Within a short time, it would create a dynamics that would hopefully be able to overtake even the biggest companies. So the goal is to create new opportunities for everyone, and if set up well, enabling users, customers, citizens will lead to better services, better products, better business, and better neighborhoods, but also smarter cities and smarter societies. Now, of course, we also want to earn some money with this, right? So free open data cannot be everything. So basically, besides this free data stream, there would be premium services. So if you want to use a particular large data volume or special services, you would have to pay for it. And also on top of this, companies could be grown that would use the data but would produce special services that they charge to people or companies. And then the idea is that after some time these data and also the computer programs lose value, because this is a very fast business. So if that would eventually become a public good, that would be good. In fact, this is how a rainforest works. After some time, the trees drop their leaves, and that's turned into this humus on which all the other plants are growing. And we know that the rainforest is a biotope that's really creating resources for everyone. There's enough for everyone, in fact, under such conditions. So we could grow this global like OpenStreetMap did. So the approach would be like Linux or Wikipedia or OpenStreetMap. OpenStreetMap is supported by 1.5 million volunteers and became the most up-to-date map of the world. Whatever happens, even after a disaster, you will quickly have up-to-date information. So what can the planetary nervous system do for us? Well, first of all, of course, real-time measurement of the state of our world. But also, this can be used to create greater awareness of the chances and risks. That means to support decision-making. On the other hand, we can use this data to learn about the world around us, in particular the social and economic world. We could create a global system science that helps us to manage the world more successfully. We could also create self-organizing systems and support collective intelligence. Yes, so let's start with the first thing, the measurement of the world. In fact, we could create something like a CERN for our society and create smart data. What's the difference between big data and smart data from my point of view? We would do tailored measurements with the planetary nervous system. We would not just measure everything all the time, but depending on our question, a certain specific measurement protocol would be triggered to give us the answer that we've been looking for. With this system, we could create awareness of our situation and of our impact on the world, so-called externalities. We could build new compasses for decision makers and measure things that are invisible today, like social capital, reputation, trust, solidarity, for example, or happiness, which is important also for economic development and other things like the resilience of our society. We could map resources and who uses them. We could also map crises. And we could even map our globe in 3D using all the pictures that people are taking all the time. So these are the positions of people who take in photographs. These are the points where the cameras have been pointing. they've all been standing next to the Colosseum, and from all these pictures that are out on the web, you can reconstruct the Colosseum in 3D. But you can do the same thing of any place in the world that people take pictures of. And if they don't do it by themselves, like tourists would do it, yeah, you could do it in a crowdsourced way, giving people points for taking pictures of certain places. So, no, we could have Europe street map, in a sense, in a crowdsourced way. With data from the planetary nervous system, we can advance complexity science and global system science to deliver explanatory models. And in fact, by now, we understand how traffic congestion comes about, and there are actually many different types of congestion, how pedestrian flows, and how crowd disasters happen and why. We can understand social influence and opinion formation to some extent, coordination problems, the breakdown of cooperation, but also the emergence of cooperation, the evolution of moral behavior, of social preferences, of social norms, or of conflict. And we can also understand how conflict spreads globally, how epidemics spread, how innovation spread, and how ideas spread, or even culture. So within just a few years, we've gained an enormous knowledge and quantitative mathematical knowledge of many of these processes. And this is important because complexity science allows us to use the hidden forces behind self-organization once we understand these forces. That means we can use the forces to our own advantage, as it's done in Asian martial arts. Or in a motor. Now, a motor turns explosion into directed, controlled motion. There are actually hundreds of explosions every minute. And we learned how to use it to our advantage. We can do the same thing with social and economic forces. And for this, we need to create the right kind of feedback loops. If we do this, a complex dynamical system self-organizes almost like magic, like Adam Smith's invisible hand. But you need to have the right kind of interaction mechanism. How do we figure it out? Well, this can be done, for example, by means of interactive virtual worlds. In fact, in the future, we'll need that much more than today, because not only processing power is exploding exponentially, data volumes are exploding even faster, which has allowed us to come up with evidence-based decision-making through the use of big data. But systemic complexity is exploding even faster, because there are so many combinatorial possibilities. And as a result, sooner or later, these systems cannot be controlled in a top-down way. Some systems are so complex that distributed control is needed, and the control goes through the right kind of self-organization. We need to have the right kinds of interactions, though, for this. So, as the level of complexity in these complex dynamical systems goes up, we need a higher level of autonomy of the system components to achieve our goals. But given, of course, suitable kinds of interaction rules. So we can say 300 years after its invention, we can make the invisible hand work. Finally, through the use of the Internet of Things, because now we can run self-organizing systems with real-time measurements and adaptive feedback. And here's an example. So still today, we're annoyed by this stop-and-go traffic that we see almost every day. And in the beginning of this animation, I'm showing this to demonstrate that we're understanding the process, that we can reproduce it with our models. Eventually, of course, we want to understand it better. So let's beam ourselves out of this annoying congestion and have a look at what's the reason for the stop-and-go traffic. It turns out that there are a few cars that try to get on the freeway. That produces small disruptions in the flow on the freeway, these disruptions are amplified, and that creates eventually stop-and-go traffic. Now, suppose these cars are equipped with radar sensors that measure the distance and relative velocity, and we use this information to let the cars drive automatically. That means we've been working on self-driving cars 10 years ago, long before Google was talking about this, with Volkswagen, by the way. And you can see it can be done in a way that would not only increase comfort and safety, but would have collective effects, beneficial effects for the entire traffic flow by stabilizing the flow and increasing the capacity. That's the interesting point here. So we've been changing the interactions to change the outcome of the interactions. Same thing can be done for traffic flows in cities. So talking about smart cities, now we can create self-organized green waves. Actually, we do this by turning around the previous principle. In the past, and still until today, we're controlling traffic flows through traffic lights. Now, what we've done is we have started to control traffic lights by the traffic flows. So the traffic lights become responsive to the local traffic situation. It's much more flexible to the local needs. And it turns out that even though that's a local control principle, it can outperform classical top-down control. So this is interesting. It has really dramatic effects, dramatic benefits for public transportation, also some benefits for individualized traffic. For pedestrians and cyclists, enormous benefits, and for the environment too, and makes travel times also more predictable. Similar principles can be applied to establish self-organized production, and that's of course extremely interesting for Industry 4.0. At the time when we were doing this, nobody was talking about Industry 4.0. And there are potentials that I think have not been materialized yet, such as kind of automated setup of entire factories, because here all the elements are talking to the other elements, so the entire factory can self-organize itself, not just the production process. And we can go one step further and think of the entire world economy and ask ourselves if it was possible to create a traffic assistance system. Couldn't we create an assistance system for the world economy too? Are booms and recessions basically stop-and-go traffic in our world economy? And I think so. So in principle, we could stabilize these production processes. We could stabilize, of course, power grids too, and European gas supply apparently is also an issue that's important that we've worked on as well. So, importantly, a suitable feedback to measurements of external effects can make the invisible hand work. It doesn't work automatically, as we've seen in the financial crisis, as we see in the breakdown of free traffic flows, as we see in the occurrence of crowd disasters. So the invisible hand doesn't work automatically. We need to take into account externalities. And with the Internet of Things, we can now measure these externalities and create the feedbacks that were lacking in the past. So the question is, can we build assistance systems for cooperation too? And the answer is yes. I believe there will be an era of socially inspired technologies as we understand how cooperation comes about through self-organization or social norms or trust or reputation and all this. We can use this to build technologies, social technologies that would support our interaction also in the real world. And one of these kind of feedbacks is, of course, that people would rate thumbs up or down or give 5 stars to a taxi or whatever. And we know that these reputation systems have beneficial effects both for customers because they could trust into getting a better service, as well as for providers and sellers, because if they have a higher reputation, they can take a higher price, which has been shown. So it's good for everyone. It increases quality and responsible behavior. That we could come up with much more sophisticated social information technologies to support us in the kind of situation that we're faced with every day. And there are basically 4 kinds of main situations you might run into. Lose-lose situations that like to avoid win-win situations where we might want to talk about creating a fair sharing of profits. Bad win-lose situations. Here, one side would win at the expense of the other side, but altogether would create a damage to the world if we would engage into this. But one side would like to exploit the other, so protection is needed here. And good win-lose situations where, again, one side would win, the other would lose, but this can be turned into a win-win situations through value transfer. And in fact, we could try to build technologies that support us in these kinds of situations, in particular in a highly complex and diverse world. So we would be able to use the opportunities that we haven't been able to use in the past and avoid mistakes. So we could build tools to support situational awareness, to support beneficial interactions, to avoid lossful interactions, and to support value transfer. Moreover, together we can build a more resilient and smarter society too. So let's come back to our smartphone. There's the acceleration sensors in there too. 3 directions are measured, X, Y, Z. And so the question is, what can we do with this really? Well, one application is collective earthquake sensing and warning. If one phone shakes, now, I might be riding a mountain bike, but if all of our phones shake, then this is probably an earthquake. So this could warn our friends and family and colleagues, by triggering off a text message to all the people in our contact list if you want. And then the question is, okay, once this has happened, what can we do? I've been organizing a hackathon in San Francisco. What if the big one hits? Because basically San Francisco is waiting for a big earthquake to happen anytime. So what to do in such a situation? And it was interesting, there were about 90 computer science people, programmers, who came up with about 10 projects. 3 of them were awarded with a prize. And these are the 3 winning projects. So project number 1 proposed an app, and actually they had it, they could demonstrate it, where you could take pictures of a broken bridge or a damaged building or whatsoever, and could annotate it. And as soon as the phone had connectivity, it would upload this information, so it would become available to others immediately, including the disaster response team of the government, but also the neighbors. Now, the problem is communication may not work because centralized infrastructure might be out of operation. Fortunately, we can now use fire chat. So phones would directly communicate with each other, would be a decentralized communication network. Still would need to charge our phones. The electrical system might be broken down too. So that's why ChargeBeacon came up with this idea to have these local solar cells, solar panels that would allow the people in the neighborhood to charge their phones. And by the way, also communicate with each other about what was the situation like and what had to be done. And finally, Helping Hands came up with a further app that basically allowed to say, I need help, I need some food for my baby, I need to have some support for my grandfather, I need some water. And other people could say, okay, I have something at home, some reserves that I could share, and I'm happy to help, and all these kind of things. And this platform would coordinate it. So it would bring demand and supply together in the neighborhood and would free up capacity of the disaster response team of the government that might take up 2-3 days to be fully operational. So it's beneficial for the government, it's beneficial also for the people, and therefore we're seeing the emergence of a new paradigm away from this classical top-down, hierarchical, military kind of organization that we used to have in disaster response management towards this kind of approach where basically there would be still a central coordination that would say, okay, we need this, that, and that, but then basically this would be matched with activities of people and companies who would say, okay, I can do this, or I can contribute that. And that means a new way of bringing top-down and bottom-up together. Now, in a quickly changing world, politics and business becomes increasingly similar to disaster response management, it sometimes feels. And that means this new approach will also be more and more important for politics and business. And these new kinds of technologies will be important to enable it, to allow the coordination to happen. And obviously, in a more and more complex world, we need to have also tools to support collective intelligence, because it's too complicated for us to understand the entire world. So we need to have platforms to bring the best ideas of many minds together. And there are some interesting insights here that the Netflix challenge and other research has actually brought about, which is that it's not the best team that wins. It's the combination of many different solutions that creates the best solution. So this is really astonishing, and in conclusion, diversity is really important for collective intelligence, but also for innovation, for resilience, and many other important things in our society. In fact, this is some work about the development of economies in the world, and you can see the most developed economies are the most complex and diverse ones, so diversity is really key. Now, we can create new value too, right? We need money, obviously, yeah? And we can turn data into gold to overcome financial, economic, and public spending crisis. This is not just symbolic. Bitcoin has shown us that data can be turned into real value, into gold. Money is basically a coordination mechanism. And if the coordination mechanism that we have today is not working well enough, then why don't we improve this coordination mechanism? Why don't we find new ways of creating money? So the question is, can we overcome tragedies of the commons too? Bitcoin doesn't do this, so it's not the ultimate solution. Yeah? There are better solutions. Can we turn this downward spiral that we've often seen, we might still be in, hopefully not, could we turn it into an upward spiral? Well, in fact we can. I've been thinking about this, about new financial architectures, about new kinds of money, and something that I call social money, a multidimensional kind of money where we might also consider reputation. By the way, we're talking about the euro crisis. I believe I have some interesting proposals to make how to get out of this without giving up the euro. So if you want to read about qualified money, then let me know what you think about it. But here is a very interesting recent insight that we made through theoretical consideration, but also by experiments. Usually what happens in so-called social dilemma situations that cooperation would be desirable, but it's unstable, in the very same way as this circular free traffic flow is often unstable and creates a phantom traffic jam. So we end up with a tragedy of the commons with very low levels of cooperation. Now, merit-based matching is a mechanism that can overcome this problem. What we would do here is match more cooperative people or companies with other more cooperative companies or people, or less cooperative companies and people with less cooperative people. Well, why is this good? Because not only does cooperation suddenly pay off and become stable, it's even that there is a trend towards more cooperation. That means those that didn't cooperate much in the beginning would get more cooperative. And not only would we get a trend towards more cooperation and towards overcoming the tragedy of the commons, we can even find in our experiment that inequality would be reduced too. And that's another problem that we're struggling with. So the classical efficiency-equality trade-off that we've seen in economics in the past, and economic theory too, I believe can be overcome. So what are we waiting for? Let's get ready for this. Let's make the magic happen. And what would you have to do? Well, obviously, we would have to invest into this. But I personally believe we can't just do business as usual. Europe must run as fast as possible to be more flexible. It means it's like in the Silicon Valley. If there is a good idea, you need to do that immediately. You have to run as fast as you can. And if you're lucky, then you'll be able to be the best one in the market. But if there are delays, if there are obstacles, it's not possible. And I think at the moment we have too many delays and still too many obstacles. So I believe competition, prices, and going from funding to refunding might actually change things to the better. We could also think of using crowdfunding also from public institutions, not just from private donors. And the question is, could we use structural funds, for example, to create maker spaces, fab labs, hack spaces, nervous cafes? Well, that's a question that I'd like to raise, but if Europe is faced with an informational Sputnik shock, which I personally think, then don't we need something like a European space program for information systems? Think about it. In any case, we must establish new institutions. This is an example from Switzerland. Alfred Escher has established Swiss Northeastern Railway, the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, Credit Suisse, Swiss Life, It was just enormous. And Europe needs to start to think like somebody like Alfred Escher. We need to have new institutions for the digital society. And we need to be innovative. We need to think out of the box. I think Europe has started it the right way by engaging into many ideas of Jeremy Rifkin. And you're implementing this basically in the smart energy grid. Now we have to do the same thing, a decentralized participatory system for information systems. And so how to build a thriving digital economy? Well, first of all, we need to engage into bottom-up participation and diversity. We need to give legal ownership of personal data to individuals, or at least right of use. We need to establish or enforce the informational self-determination principle. And we should require interoperability too. So data would not be locked in different data silos like Facebook or Twitter, but it could start to flow between these silos and basically unleash new potential value. And of course, then we need to create a framework for seamless but paid data exchange so everyone could earn on data, including the citizens. We should establish a multidimensional finance system, and we need to have efficient sanctions in order to suppress misuse and discrimination. So, ending with my last slide, Europe should build the core components of the economy 4.0 and a smart digital society. And I think these are the planetary nervous system, multidimensional finance, and social information technologies. And I would love to help with this. Thank you very much.